everyone, and welcome to the Health In show today on this December day. We are happy to have you here today. We are joined by Chanel Steiner, Pretty, and Dr. Deepak Sharma. And we have a wonderful guest, Amy Anonymous, and we're going to be talking a fantastic topic today. But before we go into those details, I want to say hello to South Africa. Hello, Chanel. How are you?
Hello. I'm good. Just hot, but I'm good. How are you?
Perfect. Thank you so much. Dr. Preeti Shah, how are you today? Coming to us from all the way from India.
All the way from India. Hello, everybody. And I'm so happy to see all of you all today. Such happy, brilliant faces. And thank you, everybody who's listening to us. Thank you for joining in.
Hello, Dr. Deepak, also coming to us from India. How are you?
I'm good, Nuda. Thank you so much and welcome everyone to Health in Show, the world biggest show on health and health is everywhere. And here in this show, we spread the knowledge of about the health. So welcome everyone. Thank you, Nuda.
Thank you. So hello, everyone. We are going to talk about a very nice topic, as I think. We are going to explore the realm of medicine. I'll get to you right away. I just want to say, if anyone in our audience has a question and would like to have us ask Amy this question.
I think we're losing Uta. Uta, I think the storm is really caught up in Portugal. I think the weather is not very supportive. So Chanel, why don't you go ahead? Yeah.
Okay. So I've never done this section before. So if you do want to either call in or join us in the chat, so you can join us in the chat. It's alongside, just put in your name and you can ask any question. We'll definitely direct it to Amy and we'll be watching the chat there for you. And if you'd like to call in, it's just a voice call. The number to call is 919-518-9773 or on Skype at computers 2K voice. Okay. And I will just hop in and I will introduce Amy. So we're here today with the incredible Amy Anonymous, who was born and raised in Toronto, my old stomping grounds, in Canada. We're excited to have her on the Health and Show today to discuss medical cannabis. Amy is a cannabis advocate, activist, baker, and MMAR card holder. She spends most of her time educating about the benefits of cannabis use and helps consumers make choices on medical cannabis geared to their support. She makes edibles such as cookies, bars, and candies, as well as wearables such as tinctures and cream. So let's hop right in. Tell us, Amy, first of all, welcome to the show. And tell us how you became a medical cannabis activist.
You know, I was a cannabis consumer way before I became a medical cannabis patient. But I got into a very traumatic car accident in 2005. And it left me with many injuries. From there, I was prescribed many narcotics, and they changed my life completely for the worse, and I didn't want that lifestyle. So I looked into alternatives to the painkillers I was using, and cannabis just kept coming up. So I decided to take a stronger look at cannabis on the medical front as opposed to something I just did when I was bored and wanted to have fun. And that is what changed my entire life. From there, I got into baking. I was a new mother at the time. I didn't want to, smoking a joint at the park is not looked, it's frowned upon. At that time, it was very, 2006-ish. So it was very frowned upon at the time. So I got into edibles, making myself edibles and then making other people edibles. And it just all went from there.
And before we go any further, because I looked this up, but I mentioned it in your intro, what does it mean to be an MMAR card?
So MMAR is Medical Marijuana Access Regulations. That was the first program put in place in Canada to legally use and consume, and if you choose to, grow cannabis as a medical patient. So I had to apply to the government, much like they have to do now, but it was a lot more forms at the time, and explain why I wanted to use cannabis, why my doctor thought it was appropriate for me to use cannabis, and all of the security measures I would have in which to have cannabis in my home. And when you think about that now, I've never had to do that for Tylenol, or cough syrup, or anything but cannabis. The stigma attached to it is just so real. And it still is, it's dwindling. Don't get me wrong, like we're doing better, but there's still stigma attached. And those forms were just proof in the pudding, you know, like how am I going to store my cannabis? They wanted to hear about locks and doors and like security codes. I know. So that's MMAR was the first program that was issued through the government. Since then, we've went through a few more: MMPR, AMCPR. Right now, though, the government is looking at, I guess a polite way of saying it is ditching medical cannabis. I guess now that we have recreational cannabis, and I quote that because I can't stand calling it recreational cannabis. I'm not going out and playing soccer. You know what I mean? It's like it's adult use. I'm an adult using cannabis. I'm not recreationally having a beer. Not that I drink beer, but if I did, you know, I'm just an adult having this. So giving it the term recreational cannabis is a little bizarre to me. But since we have legalized cannabis in Canada, the medical program seems to be falling flat. I feel like the government thinks that since it's so easily accessible now, because you can get it at, there are more cannabis dispensaries in Ontario than there are liquor stores at this moment, which is wild. So I guess the government's thinking, and this is all throughout Canada, right, is that if you can get it so accessibly, why do we also have a medical program for it? And that's a little irking. Just because as a person who uses cannabis medically, I feel like they're taking away the legitimacy of the plant because now it's available to easily purchase. So it's a little frustrating for medical patients, but this is the government.
Mm-hmm. You brought up a good question here for me. So we're talking of plants, and I don't want to use the term you said used recreational use of cannabis, but I'm going to say leisure use of cannabis to make it sound a little bit different. Now, since the medical sphere is one thing, we're fighting pain, we're fighting side effects of drug use, of conventional drug use, so to speak. So if we're talking leisure and we're talking medicinal use, are we talking the same plants or are we talking different plants?
And this is where it's really bizarre. Same plants, exact same plants. The difference is the purpose in which you're using it. I medically use cannabis for pain relief. Now, something that an adult would use leisurely, I like that. Something that an adult would use leisurely still has the same components in the plant. It's the same plant. It's just you're receiving medicinal effects from it. Whereas the other person using it, who's using it leisurely, may too, but they're not using it for that purpose. So something that works for pain for me, you may also use leisurely after work to watch a TV show with. It doesn't mean that it's any different. It just means for me, it's helping me with my pain, to cope with the pain that I'm in. I have chronic pain from a car accident in 2005. So this is why I use cannabis medically. But it is the same plant. So it's very confusing. And I can see why that question would come about. Same plant. Now, there are thousands of different strains of different lineage on plants, right? Kind of like tomatoes. There's hundreds of different types of tomatoes. They all have a little bit of a different taste, texture. The same with cannabis. I mean, yeah, taste, texture, effects. Cannabis has something called cannabinoids, which in those cannabinoids are all of the things like the THC, the CBD, THCA, all the things we talk about that give you the medical effects from cannabis. There's also terpenes. Now, terpenes, I think you guys all know about, is the essential oils that the plant creates. Those are what give you the entourage effects. So THC will give you that somewhat high effect, but the terpenes like linalool, for instance, linalool is also found in lavender. So when people use lavender to relax, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, but linalool is actually what is helping with the relaxation. Well, cannabis produces linalool too. Isn't that great? So someone who may be in a state where they need to relax would look for a cannabis plant that has linalool in it. So really, when we thought the whole time this was about THC and CBD only, we just got like the door kicked open on terpenes. And so now that we're finally putting money and investing into research on the plant, we're learning that, wow, we were wrong. We were so wrong. For instance, sativa and indica are terms you're probably familiar with. Sativa, what we consider sativa is a plant that makes you energetic, uplifted, or effects you receive from the plant, energetic, uplifting, very awakening. Whereas indica, we're told, makes you relaxed, very sedated. However, the actuality of those words is the shape of the plant. It's not the effects, but we didn't do enough research on the plant to know, so we've just used these broad terms. Whereas a sativa plant is a much bigger, wider, foxtail-y plant with wide-reaching arms, and an indica plant is a very short, fat-bodied plant. The effects don't necessarily mean you're going to be relaxed. It depends on the terpenes of that plant. So all the cool things we're now learning about this plant now that legalization has happened here in Canada and in other spots in the world.
So what part of the plant for our viewers to actually hone in on a bit of more detail here about the plants, what part of the plant contains the most of these linoleuls and the terpenes and the THC in the end effect?
Well, on the flower of the plant. So you can actually consume the whole plant. Some people juice live cannabis plants. You don't get the high effect from THC because of the THCA has not converted to THC at the moment, but you do get all the medicinal effects from it because of the cannabinoids and the terpenes that we talked about. But generally speaking, when people consume cannabis, they use the buds, or the flowers is what they're called. And on those flowers, you'll see these little sugary looking crystals, kind of like diamonds. And that is truly where all of the good stuff of the plant is. That's where the terpenes are, the cannabinoids. This is where the THC, the CBD, everything that you're looking for is right there. Now, there are little remnants of it on the sugar leaves, which are the smaller little leaves you see around the flower, or the fan leaves, which are the huge leaves you see on the plant, but not as condensed as you would in the flower, which is why people consume the flower. But people also make creams and tinctures out of the roots, out of the stems, out of the leaves, because they still do have these medicinal components to them, just not in an abundance like the flower would.
So what do you make your cookies of then? The actual resin and the flowers? Yeah.
So how I make it, there's actually a few different ways. I like to use the flowers in which to create a butter. So I infuse butter with flour. But you can also use leaves. So people who grow their own plants at home, use the leaves. Will it be as potent? No. Will it still be effective? More than likely, depending on how much you put in. But the whole plant is usable. So it's a fabulous idea that if you can use the buds if you just smoke, you can use the buds for smoking. You can then use the rest of the plant and process it into maybe a hash, which is really just cold water and agitation. And that will take off those cannabinoids, the trichomes that I told you about, the little sugary things on there. And that's really what makes hash, all those little resin heads. So you could do so many different applications from one plant. Like I was talking about infusing the butter. I put butter in a pot with flour with buds that I've ground up. You could also use alcohol and put alcohol over the leaves and cover them, and then evaporate off the alcohol. And then you've got a beautiful tincture. So there's a lot of different ways depending on how you want to consume it. Vaporizing too, let's not forget, people vaporize. That You can use full plant for as well. You can use the flowers. Some people will use the full plant to make an extraction from it and then vaporize that. So there are endless ways in which to consume cannabis, and we are just at the tip of the iceberg with how it's going to be in the future. I'm curious myself as if flower will still be as popular as it is now as a consumption method as opposed to concentrates. Will we get rid of all of the green, maybe not needed parts and just go straight for the cannabinoids that we're looking for and use those in any other form? So it's a wild world, this cannabis one.
It is, and very interesting indeed. My first I wouldn't say introduction, the first TV show I saw on the use of cannabis, where they trialed it, if I remember correctly, in a care home in Israel, where they gave it to the people living in the care home, and they were all able to reduce the intake of their drugs that they had to take for all sorts of complaints they were having. And I thought, that is so fascinating. Why haven't we got that already? And why is it being so very much suppressed? And I mean, it's wonderful to see that cannabis has legalized it to that extent that it is usable now. And I think the world is slowly catching up, the rest of the world, so to speak, is slowly catching up. But I think there is so much potential in it. And as you well say, we've not reached the tip of the iceberg yet. I don't think either. This is, and we mustn't forget, you can use the plant for, I don't know, making clothes. You can you can use, so everything of this plant is usable. So this is so fascinating. So I want to hone in on the consuming of cannabis. You say you bake cookies. I have no idea, and it's probably different from individual to individual. But if you go to the doctor and he gives you a painkiller that will work a certain amount of time, then you have to repeat. You usually get used to this painkiller, and you usually have to up the dose to get the same effect that you used to have on a lower dose, because you're getting accustomed to it. How is this with cannabis?
With cannabis, somewhat you can build a tolerance to cannabis. I don't want to be like, you will have the same dose for the rest of your life. No. I started off with very low dosed edibles and then ended up at very high dosed edibles. Currently on our legal market here in Canada, you can only sell a 10 milligram package of something edible, whereas I'm used to 500 milligram cookies. So our legal system has not caught up with our legacy market yet. But it will in turn happen. But your tolerance does go up after time. It's just a matter of adding more, I guess, more medicine to your butter, or adding more product to your butter. I like to start off low for people new to cannabis, especially, whereas I was explaining to you, 10 milligrams is what we have here as a regulated dose here, or the most that we can sell in a package. People new to cannabis find that can be excessive. Just because I've been doing this a long time doesn't mean that everyone else has been, right? And I think a 500 milligram cookie may comatose some people. So I love the fact that I like that we do have smaller increments for edibles here in Canada, but I think we should also have the option of higher, because at this point, how many gummies am I going to have to eat to even feel an effect from it if it's 10 milligrams and I'm used to a 500? I'm going to be pepped up on sugar before I have any healing in me at this point. But with edibles, your tolerance can go up. What I have found is that people will start baking with butter, so the full plant method, and then move up to concentrates, because it's a concentrated version, and you'll get more THC, more different cannabinoids in there, and more terpenes. So it does happen. The only thing, the difference is that since it's so regulated, medicine is, big pharma is very regulated by the government, you know, it's a lot easier to increase your dosage that way. Whereas if someone is, let's say, eating edibles, you know, eating a quarter of a cookie to a half a cookie, yeah, it's still, but it's not it's not as a scientific approach, I guess you can say, as it would be as if you were taking a Tylenol with 500 milligrams and you change to 750. It's a little different because you're cooking at home. If you're making these at home, the chances of you having a lab in your home are quite slim. To know exactly what you got in there. And that's, a lot of people are making their own medicine now that we can grow our own plants. I am so for that. If you can self-sustain, if financially it makes so much more sense. So it's not as accurate for someone at home making their own edibles as it is for someone purchasing it from a store. If you are fortunate enough to know the exact THC percentage and CBD percentage in the product you are using, you can then, if you're really good at math and very skilled, you can definitely get it figured out. It took me many years, but I am great with the cannabis math. Don't ask me like algebra though, no idea. But it takes a lot. It's trial and error on finding out what dosage is right for you as well. Doctors are just as new at this. You guys can attest to this. It is just as new for you as it is for the general public. So we're kind of all learning this together as to what is a good dosage. So it's hard to say what is good for me may not be good for you. And a strain, the crazy thing is that Tylenol generally works the same for most people. I'm using Tylenol because it's just so numb. But cannabis works differently for everyone. Your cannabinoid receptors in your body are different than mine. So how something may affect me, pain relief, may completely do the opposite for you, not give you pain, but may make you awaken and enlightened. So it's really a trial and error. And this is what we're learning with cannabis. So it's a great time to be alive and be a part of this. I can see that. I love being
without doubt. Without doubt. Chanel.
So, along the same kind of train of thought, and I'm bringing a little bit of an anecdote, and I don't know if Amy remembers this at all or not. Amy and I met through a friend many, many years ago, and I spoke to her then about, I had smoked a lot of weed when I was young and, through university, and then I stopped because I started getting these kind of manic episodes where I was freaking out and I didn't want people to look at me. And Amy just calmly across the coffee table was like, it's because you're smoking the wrong weed. So within that, and literally she handed me a cookie that night and a little bit of weed, and I went home and I didn't have that experience. I had the complete, happy, light, euphoric feeling that I think that's the sort of the type of feeling that you want when you experience smoking marijuana. I know not everybody wants the same experience, but so within that frame, and with what Uta just asked, if something doesn't work for pain or, I know that weed is used for pain and inflammation in the body. It's big with arthritis, and glaucoma is a big thing that it helps with as well. So if what someone is working with isn't necessarily working for them, or they've reached kind of a threshold with the plant, a particular plant that they're working with, is switching to a different strain or different levels or combinations of cannabinoids. Is that a direction that you often take with people who are using it medically?
I want to just let you know, I do remember that, and I'm quite positive that I gave you some Cinderella 99, which is a strain that I tend to, at the time, it was, I love that strain. I haven't seen it in a while, but it's exactly for the opposite of what you were dealing with. It makes you light, euphoric, feel happy, as opposed to paranoid. So I do remember that, and it is exactly true. Kind of like a t-shirt. All small shirts don't fit you, even if you're a small. Some have different, they just don't look as good. Same with cannabis. Not everything's going to suit you. So I have learned that there are many strains that do not work with me. And there are some that work fantastic with me. This is where our research starting to, with legalization, we're starting to learn what these things do. And what I found with the strains that didn't work for me, it was their terpene profiles. They had terpenes in there that may not have worked with me. Whereas I like a strain with a terpene called myrcene. I like strains with that terpene specifically because it's very sedating. Whereas other strains I used, they didn't have that, I guess, and it didn't work as well for me. There's many that I do like, but that's one very common one. So just because the strain that you tried now didn't work, it doesn't mean that there are thousands of strains out there, and we are crossbreeding these strains every day. So there are thousands more, you know what I mean? So it's not to say that it all won't work for you, just that specific strain did not. Bringing it back to tomatoes, there's some tomatoes I don't like, they're still a tomato, they just don't work, but other ones I absolutely love, So it's just what works for your body. Everyone having a different cannabinoid, it's just like everyone having your system views it differently. You're gonna feel differently from it. So that's why I say, me and my best friend, we may like the same strains, but we don't get the same effects from them. And it doesn't mean that it's any different. It just means our body views this differently. Wild, isn't it?
Absolutely. And you've just answered a question that I've been asked several times, because people always assume I know everything about everything because I'm a homeopath. The question that has been raised is always, when you see people use cannabis on TV, they are always off in another world, swaying to different realms. And then I know people that have used cannabis and they're like, what the heck is that all about? So it's the strain, quite likely.
It's your endocannabinoid system. It's the system in your body that regulates all the things that are coming in that really give you this. But it's true. I mean, I've consumed a lot of cannabis today, and I'm not, ooh, look at me. I'm just sitting here with my protein shake and a water. So to each their own, but it affects people so differently. If I sit at the table with 6 of my friends, one of them's like keeled over just eating donuts, and then there's just me like, okay, what's next? So it's everyone feels differently about it, but you can get that very euphoric, floaty feeling. It's definitely a doable thing, but you build a tolerance. I haven't had that feeling in many years. God, I wish I could get that feeling back.
I've heard cannabis makes you sleep very deeply without dreaming, and gives you indica we're talking probably. So it gives you that absolute relaxed feeling without any agitation, without much movement in the nighttime. Is that part of the plants when they have this relaxing?
Definitely. It definitely can. More sedating strains or terpene profiles can definitely make you relax. Cannabis is phenomenal. Certain strains and certain terpenes are phenomenal for making you relaxed. And as we used to call it, indicas or sativas, definitely it would be, if we considered it that, it would be the indica version that would, but that's just a plant size. Would definitely be that. I've never experienced not having dreams because of cannabis, but again, to each their own. Everyone is so unique and so different, but definitely cannabis can help with sleep. A lot of people who are sleep deprived use cannabis for that purpose. Even CBD, which is known to be calming. For me personally, I don't find CBD to be as beneficial for me because I don't have any symptoms that I feel CBD would be better for me than the other terpenes and THC that I'm using. But CBD is a phenomenal cannabinoid from cannabis that can do all these things as well without any head high associated with it. And that's a lot of people's issues. Like, I don't want to be high. You think about reefer madness, right? What about the children? What about them? They don't care. But cannabis doesn't necessarily make you do that. I hope it doesn't make anyone do that. Really, I've never seen the stuff that I've seen there happen in real life. But CBD is a great way for someone, an introduction to cannabis. for someone who is experiencing pain, sleeplessness, or anxiety. Also, we use CBD. This is kind of like an insider trade thing. We use CBD for people that have consumed way too much cannabis. So I've been to many events where people have just concentrates can be overwhelming if you're not used to them consuming concentrates. And what happens when you've consumed too much cannabis is you'll get a little tired. You may not be as you may be a little klutzy, you know what I mean? You may be a little hungry. Some people get a little angsty or agitated. So if you found that you think that you have consumed too much, you can't overdose. It's physically impossible. You just get a little agitated. I would then recommend some CBD for someone, because CBD kind of counteracts the way THC works. It works really well with THC also, but it helps to counteract the negative effects that someone may feel from consuming too much cannabis or cannabinoids for their body. And again, overdose, impossible. You could not smoke that. Challenge.
Better not.
Because I'm up for it.
You're on your own. No one will survive. We'll all be sleeping. You'll be having a great time. So
I'll be just hanging out over here. But
it'll be a boring group. That's all.
I'd be having a great time though. But CBD is definitely something that I would recommend to someone who wants to get into cannabis and is a little scared of just where to start, because THC is scary, you know, for people that are new. They hear about being high, and being high is not as scary as it sounds. It's just having a little bit of a fuzz on your regular thinking pattern. I've never had a change in thought. I've never made any crazy rash decisions that I shouldn't have. It just helps for me, it helps with my pain, and it helps me go through my day. I have chronic pain and no one would know. Because what do you do? Talk about it all day? Am I just going to hold my wrist and be like, you just don't do that, you know, you just live your life. So cannabis has allowed me to do that, and I am so grateful for it, because the alternative was not what I wanted to be.
Yeah, understandably. So cannabis is a starter drug, as they often claim. What do you think?
Start you walking to the fridge, but that's about it. So I've heard these claims, and I know many people who used cannabis who've never even smoked a cigarette in their life. I don't believe that at all. I think that's very much so part of the reefer madness. And I don't believe it at all. Cannabis actually helps people get off opiates. Cannabis substitution program. I got goosebumps when I talk about that, but it's very true. People use cannabis to help get off opiates that they're on. And I've watched this, you know, being in this industry for over 15 years, I've seen some of the craziest stuff, and my face is going to start going red because it just makes me so happy. But I've seen people get off of some very hard drugs using cannabis. I've seen a lot of people that go to methadone clinics that stop going to methadone clinics because they just use cannabis. I've also seen people with MS who came in a wheelchair, get up and walk. And that's like,
yeah,
cannabis
that's
is crazy,
amazing. Yeah.
right? So I'm a firm believer that cannabis saves. It saved me. You know, I would not be where I am today if I was still taking the pharmaceuticals that were prescribed to me willingly by my doctor with no mean for ill will towards me. That's what it did, you know? So like, I'm just so glad that I found cannabis medically, and then I could open the doors for other people to see it medically as well.
Yeah. Let's hone in on that a bit, because it is true. I've heard of people get up and walk again with MS, and I've seen people with Parkinson's stop shaking. The tremor completely reduced to almost inexistent. And still, there are places that do not admit medical cannabis into the healthcare system. So tell us a little bit more about the uses of medical cannabis.
I mean, well, for starters, there's so many people in jail right now still for cannabis, for the use of cannabis, not even the sales, just the use and possession of cannabis, which I think is insane, because if we have it legalized here, and in America, a lot of the states have it legalized statewide, but not throughout the whole country. And I think this is ridiculous that we are shunning a plant. As you were just speaking about Parkinson's, I just grabbed my heart. I used to work with a woman at a dispensary I worked with, and her husband had Parkinson's. And we had a strain that he had used, and it totally stopped his tremors, his muscle spasticity. The strain was G13 Haze. Will that work for everyone? I don't know. But for him, it was like night and day difference. The man could hold a fork. He could do things now, which he couldn't do before. He had to have other people hold it for him. And I've seen a lot of people who are in wheelchairs and unable to move themselves and have serious muscle spasticity issues, and tremors. And the cannabinoids, like in the cannabis that they're consuming, stop that. And it's, as I said, your endocannabinoid system is really what decides on how you feel from it. But watching the woman with MS get out of her chair because she was vaping cannabinoids was one of the coolest things I have ever seen. She had been in that chair for years, and she goes, I just want to show you something. I'm like, I'm still crying. And then she just stood up, and the room just went like, like just the whole room flipped. That always we've watched this when we wheel her into the room, and she just stood up and then walked to the counter, and it was like, so yeah, cannabis doesn't just work for pain. It works for muscle spasticity. It works for any types of tremors, or for tremors. It works for mental health issues. It works for such as anxiety, depression. And there are so many things that cannabis is good for. People with cancer use cannabis to help with many things, such as appetite stimulation, such as pain relief, such as mood enhancement. So there's not just one use for cannabis. It's such a I would compare it to penicillin. It's got so many applications, and we are just learning what they all are. And as we spoke about earlier, just because one strain doesn't work for you for that doesn't mean that others won't. And it's very great that we're now putting so much research into this, especially in Israel. They lead the way with that, straight up. But the fact that we're putting so much research into cannabis, because we're going to know the little intricacies of it. We're going to know what exactly it is that is causing this to stop the pain, and then be able to isolate that from the plant, instead of man-made producing it. At one point we may still actually have, I think it was called Sativex. It was like a man-made cannabis tincture made with like man-made cannabinoids. It didn't come from a plant, it didn't come from a plant. They produced it. So I hope that we still stick with plant medicine and isolate things from the plant instead of just try to recreate it. Because it's already here in nature. We have it. It's here. We just need to do a little bit better at researching it, and then we're there, Yeah,
absolutely. Dr. Pretty, Dr. Dr. Sharma, any questions? Chanel, are you still with us?
Emmy.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm here with you. So, Emmy, here in India, cannabis is totally banned. Even we cannot get the medical cannabis on the store. Recently, I visited a country, Thailand, where the cannabis is very common, and it can be available in the general stores or the special stores as well for the medical cannabis. So we do not have any experience about this as a homeopath. We are treating the patient who are taking overdose of cannabis. So where we can suggest the mica and the sulfur and the many medicine, that's it. We are personally, I am not studying very much about the cannabis. So today I listened about your talk and about more about the cannabis. So this is wonderful. So being a homeopath, I only know about the treatment of the overdoses of the cannabis.
Okay, I think that's great that you're willing to learn, even though it's not available where you are. It wasn't available here until we fought for it either, right? Like we fought. I was arrested many times. We fought to get legalization thing, and I hope that at some point in India, it is legalized there, because then you would be able to use it in your practices. Here we do have stores. Here it's widely available. Whereas unfortunately, because of your regulations, it is not. I It's a shame that the stigma is so attached to cannabis where it can't be legalized, because apples are legal and that's a plant, and pears are legal, and like fur is legal, but we can't use this plant that has helped so many people. I'm just hoping at some point in India that it is legalized. Did you guys not, did you not use cannabis in a drink form? Have you ever seen that where you are?
No, yes, I seen many times, but not for the study purpose. I just see for the medical herbs and in the museum and in my studies in my laboratories only. I did not take in my hand. Never I did not take on my hand. So I do not have many experience with this cannabis.
I understand that, and that's where we're lacking, is not being able to give you the experience with cannabis, because you as a doctor could treat so many patients in different ways naturally, which we're all into, right? As opposed to with pharmaceuticals. So I really hope that one day is accessible for you to try, because if you are the person who is able to help people and you are being held back from doing that because of it's not legal where you are, I just think that's insane. I think it's absolutely insane.
Thank you, Preeti.
Did
You
I
want to
answer
say
your
something?
question?
I'm struggling a little bit with connection myself, but if you can still hear me, I think as a homeopath, the rest of us are homeopaths here. So we use cannabis in a homeopathic way. By homeopathic way, I mean the energy of cannabis, because homeopathic medicines are really, they are ultra dilute to the level that you will not find the substance, the original substance at all, and all that remains is the energy of that substance. Substance could come from a plant source, it could come from a mineral source, it could come from an animal source, but we do use cannabis as a remedy homeopathically. And India, in many ways, leads the world from a homeopathic perspective. We are with maximum number of homeopathic practitioners, colleges, and a lot of homeopathic users. And what I think would be interesting to study and share notes, if we may, Amy, of how you have used cannabis, the actual substance, for what indications, and compare that with how we as homeopaths have used cannabis energetically. Because if I would kind of open my materia medica, we have used cannabis for, let's say, joint pain. We've used cannabis for anxiety. We've used cannabis for sleeplessness. We have used cannabis for, let's say, urine infection, anything, But how does that compare with how you have used? I think that's going to be a very interesting thing, and I think a lot can come out of it. So that's something I think would be interesting to take it from this discussion, I believe.
I agree with you, and I like the fact that you say you get to use it spiritually. For me, how I consume cannabis myself is I smoke cannabis. I roll it and I consume it. I used to eat a lot more cannabis. Time consuming. It was very time consuming to create edibles all the time, but I do. So, but I also, when I'm in a rush, I will smoke a joint, or a blunt is what I do. And that's how I relieve my pain. I'm curious as to how you are used to using it. Like, in what application do you use it?
So it's like any other homeopathic remedy, we have various potencies of the cannabis available. It could be in the form of like a dilution, or it could be used in a pill format, etc. So it's used in a homeopathic perspective, like a homeopathic remedy or a homeopathic medicine. like how we would use any other homeopathic remedy.
Okay.
Uh, I maybe if I may ask a kind of a follow up question in terms of uh, when you say that cannabis can be used for so many different purposes, but anybody who is new to this, who is a novice and who would want to explore use of medical cannabis, is there a repository, a central resource where people could come look up things and kind of connect with advocates or look up for official information around cannabis?
So our government has a website. I don't particularly recommend it, but, but they, just being real, they do have a website with very minor facts on cannabis and how to use cannabis. But unfortunately, there isn't really one. A lot of different organizations have been set up or set themselves up, such as different doctors' clinics, in order to teach patients on how to consume it. But there's not one just big general hub where you can receive information, which is where we're really lacking. For someone new to use cannabis, I don't know if they're aware that there's suppositories that people use for endometriosis. I don't know if someone new to cannabis would know that. I don't know if someone intermediate use cannabis would actually even know that. But they exist, and people use them, and people use them who have colon cancer as well. So there isn't actually a hub of this information other than through the government's information on cannabis, but their information, although generally accurate, isn't the easiest for someone new to this plant to digest. It's there, but it's in very government regulated words. As opposed to something that I would have a conversation with my friend. It's very intimidating trying to learn about something that, has had such a stigma attached to it, reading about it from a government website and then just expecting those words to just translate into action. I used to go to people's homes, and I actually still do this, and actually teach them about cannabis. I remember there was a paraplegic man who, the home he was staying at, they finally allowed him to have a vaporizer. They didn't know how to use it. So they called me in to teach the home and as well as his care staff how to use the vaporizer so that he could get the benefits from. And unfortunately, that's where we're at, because there isn't just a general knowledge about it, because it is all so new. So it's really a matter of finding a friend, and some people don't have friends that know anything about cannabis, so they go back to this government website that's just like, don't eat a lot of cannabis. By the way, we don't recommend it. It's just here for you. Like it's it's very confusing for your general person. But there are, as I said, there are doctors here in Canada. We do have a lot of doctors' clinics that are specifically for cannabis. So it's like a niche market for doctors who sign prescriptions for patients who would like to use cannabis. And at that point, they can then recommend what they think the patient should use. But as we just spoke about, not all cannabis affects everyone the same because of your endocannabinoid system. So this is only a recommendation. It's not really going to be a be all or end all, much like any other medicine that's prescribed. It's, let's try it out and see if it goes. So these cannabis clinics are great for people new to cannabis, but they're not as easily accessible to the general public. This is a doctor's office, so you have to have an appointment and so on. So we haven't gotten there yet, unless there's something that I just haven't been aware of. I don't know, but we haven't really gotten there yet. Licensed producers are the companies that produce cannabis that is then sold to our government, and then the government then sells it to stores, and then the stores sell it to people. It's a weird process of how cannabis gets out. So the licensed producers, the people who are actually growing the cannabis, they don't sell it directly to you. It has to go through the government and then be sold back, and then you can buy it. So it's a very long process of receiving this cannabis, but a lot of licensed producers will also, discuss their product, how it's used, and its cannabinoids and its terpene content. The only thing is that we can't, part of our guidelines is we can't recommend cannabis for like, this is good for pain. This is good for, you're not allowed to do that. It's part of a regulation. So we really have people going in circles here in Canada. We've done a great job with legalization. It happened. That's great. But there's so much more that needs to be done. Like we just talked about, a general hub for people to actually get information that they can digest and use. A place where people feel safe coming and speaking about it and having someone other than just at a doctor's appointment where they can, have a peer group of like, hey, is this for you? How do you feel? We're getting there. We're just not there yet. A lot of these things happen in small groups underground, but there's nothing like broad and above ground that is regulated that this happens in yet that I'm aware of, but I think it will happen. It's so fresh.
That's what's happening with many treatment approaches, including homeopathy. What there is in research is hidden in databases that normal people not in academia will not have access to unless they pay quite hefty amounts of money to actually get access to them. So what we have available to the general public is very scarce and minimal in information that is accessible. So there is a dire need for an information database where people in need can actually go to and get information from. So that is a very good point. Maybe someone will say, okay, I'm going to set up a database. So here's we put it out there. Somebody do and take on the initiative. We can have a database because this is something that is so very essential for people, because cannabis is something that has little side effects in comparison to many of the conventional prescription drugs that you get, for example, for pain. The side effects can leave you with more issues than you came in for. If you're taking painkillers of the like from conventional medicine, it's a fact. So if you get to go to something like cannabis that has little side effects, then that is, of course, something much better. You just raised another question for me when you mentioned that you're actually smoking it, and you were talking earlier on about cookies and the like. And I was just wondering, in homeopathy, we have different forms of absorption of a remedy. You can actually olfactory absorb a remedy. You can take it buccally, of course. We can put it topically. I know there's creams and the like of cannabis as well. But I was wondering now, if you're taking the cookies and other edibles, what does the stomach acid do to the absorption? Do you think there is a difference in the amount that is absorbed, or does it have an impact, generally speaking?
It's absorbed differently, obviously, right? Smoking goes through the lungs, it goes through your bloodstream, it's quick. The onset is very quick, whereas eating cannabis has to be digested, so it goes through your digestive tract. Eating takes a little bit longer, however, for the effects to take, for you to feel the effects, but I want to stress that the effects of eating cannabis last far longer than smoking do, because of your digestive system. Your metabolism could be much slower than someone else's. The effects that you receive from eating can last anywhere from 2 hours to 24 hours. Whereas smoking, now 24 hours is a lot, but it can definitely happen. Whereas smoking, the onset of the effects is 1 to 2 minutes, but the effects last 1 to 2 hours. So eating, although it takes a little longer to take effect, the effects do last much longer. With regards to absorption, it's a good question. When you're smoking cannabis, a lot of the THC is going out in smoke. It's burnt off as it is. You're only absorbing what you inhale. When you're eating, you're absorbing all of the product because you have to digest it, right? So the whole thing is going to be digested in your body. Whereas that whole joint that you just smoked, half of it's in the air. I find smoking is great for immediate relief. Edibles, phenomenal for long relief. With a chronic pain issue especially, edibles tend to be the better route for most. I'm not saying it's for everyone, but tend to be a wiser choice because they're more cost effective. Smoking all the time can cost you a lot more money, whereas edibles, you need far less to receive the effects that you would receive from smoking a joint. And the effects are different, I'd like to add too. The effects from smoking are a lot more cerebral, whereas the effects from eating are a lot more body-based. So you will feel it more so in your body than you would in your head if you were to eat. But there are some unicorns out there who eat cannabis and don't feel anything. I've met a few of them. They'll smoke a joint and they're like 2 shades to the wind, you know, but they're like, what is this? What is this? And it's so bizarre. I have no way to describe this to you. Their body clearly, maybe they have absorption issues with vitamins too. I don't know. I'm not in their body. But what I can tell you is that I've seen this and it does happen. And I'm sure you've probably also heard about when people consume cannabis and they become very ill. They become allergic to cannabis. So, you know, there's a lot of different things that it's so wild that cannabis can do. I mean, I've never vomited from cannabis, but some people do. And they say that could be an allergic reaction to it. So it's interesting to see, you know, how it works for other people and what if there is a side effect. As we were talking about, there aren't many side effects to cannabis. The side effect is I may be hungry, I may be tired, I may be laughing. There may be a few more, but they're all in that general. We're all generally there. But if you do consume too much cannabis, if you eat too much cannabis, again, you cannot overdose, but you can eat a little bit more than you may feel able to handle, and you will kind of feel like you have vertigo. The best bet to do is if you ever feel overwhelmed by cannabis, because it could happen, you know, is to have a meal and have a nap. Meal, most importantly, get some food in your stomach to absorb, to absorb anything, any residual anything. But have a little nap. It's going to be over soon.
Yeah. Well, it's the same with every plant or every food that we consume. The doses make poison, and there's allergies to anything and everything, so it can't be singled out as something that is just from cannabis, so to speak. So, Chanel, any further questions? We're coming to the top of the hour.
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment that I'm going to throw out there, and I just want everyone to chew on until they're ready to take it a little bit further, maybe not today in the show. So as Preeti said earlier, we have 2 provings of remedies that we use that are in the cannabis family, and it's cannabis indica and cannabis sativa. Now, what we've learned from you today, Amy, is that those are the shapes of the plant, which is something that we pay attention to when we get information about a plant that we're going to do a proving on to get more information about how we can use the plant or substance homeopathic. The other thing that was brought up, and I think is very important to stress here, is that there are now so many strains of cannabis that we are only now learning about and delving into and getting more information into our materia medicas and for homeopaths to use, and then in turn sharing that information with people who are using cannabis or interested in using cannabis. I think that is an amazing thing, and I always want to collaborate with people when it comes to information about health. So I think there needs to be a serious look at how we get this information about cannabis into our materia medicas and out to people so that they can use it effectively for whatever symptoms they have that can be helped. We live in a world where there's a ton of information, and of course we are also within the field where we often have people who cannot get to the information that they need. So I think that's a really important step moving forward. On that note, because we are very close to being over, I want to say personally, thank you so much, Amy, for being with us today, and I really hope we can have you back at some point. Uta, Deepak, Preeti, amazing. I love being on the show with you both. Uta?
Yes, I'm still here. Go on. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. This was a very interesting show. I learned a lot today, and as you very well said, Chanel, we have a lot of work from the homeopathic perspective to get more into our materia medicas. If someone's out there and wants to put a library together on the uses of cannabis, all the research that there is, all the information that patients may need, go and do it. It is needed. It is lacking. So thank you very much, everyone. We are HWC. Come and visit our website at homeopathyworldcommunity.com for any information, any events that are upcoming. On that note, we will be back in January with new shows, exciting shows. Until then, we wish you happy holidays. If you're celebrating Christmas, Hanukkah, whatever, have a wonderful time with your families. Have a good new year, and we will see you in the new year. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here today. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. And Happy New Year to all of you. Thank you.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.